Welcome back to the program. Stay with us. We've got a great panel discussion coming up about national security and, of course, the budget repair job. But we cross now live to Perth to catch up with Finance Minister Mathias Cormann. Thanks for joining us, Minister.
Good to be here.
I want to ask you first up, what is the government's message to motorists who might be concerned about the reintroduction of indexation to fuel excise, regular tax increases on petrol?
Well, it's an important structural reform as part of our effort to repair the budget. Obviously, as a result of the decision in 2001 to remove indexation of the fuel excise, the real value of the fuel excise has fallen from about 41.5% to about 25%. Given the challenges that we're facing and given the record investment that we are proposing in the budget into productivity enhancing infrastructure, in particular road infrastructure, this is a necessary measure.
So the pain that it might cause motorists is worthwhile for the bigger budget picture?
Well, we've got to put this into context. I mean, indexation effectively will mean just about 1 cent a litre in additional fuel excise, obviously in the first year. And it is not, I mean, we believe in the context of the budget it is an important reform, and none other than Craig Emerson, former senior cabinet minister in the Gillard-Enrudd government, suggested that it was a very good reform.
Why wouldn't Joe Hockey simply make that case? It's a powerful case, it's a sensible case. As you say, people on the Labor Party, on the Labor side have made it over the years. Why wouldn't Joe Hockey just make that argument rather than get caught up in this silly argument suggesting that people, if they're so poor they don't even have a car, that they'll be escaping the tax increases, and that other people, because they don't have a lot of money, don't drive much anyway?
Joe Hockey is doing an outstanding job as Treasurer. I'm obviously working with him very closely. I've seen him put his heart and soul into the budget repair effort in order to put Australia on a stronger foundation for the future. I mean, none of us are robots. We're human beings, and from time to time we make mistakes. And obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, as the Treasurer has indicated on Friday, he realises that those comments were not that well chosen.
But political messaging is critical, and there's a lot of gotcha journalism around, and a coalition or Conservative Treasurer is going to be very much in the gun, especially when he's trying to deliver a tough budget. I mean, you can't afford too many mishaps like that from the Treasurer, can you?
Chris, I'm not a commentator. I'm part of a team which, of course, is led by the Prime Minister. I'm part of a team, an economic team, which is led exceptionally well by Joe Hockey. And of course, you know, we found when we came into government a budget situation that was in very bad shape. We inherited an economy growing below trend, rising unemployment, low consumer confidence, business investment which had plateaued, and a debt and deficit disaster after 6 years of Labor government. So they left behind not only $191 billion in accumulated deficits from their first 5 years in government, but also another $123 billion in projected deficits in their last budget, and a spending growth trajectory that was manifestly unsustainable. Now, there's no easy way to reduce a spending growth trajectory. There's no easy way to reduce payment growth by government, but it is something that we have to do if we want to protect living standards and if we want to build opportunity for the future.
Do you believe that you've made that case, that big picture budget argument, well enough to the public since the election? Obviously, you made it strongly enough in the lead up to the election because it was a landslide victory. But since the election, have you actually fumbled the public advocacy of that big picture budget reform task that you and Joe Hockey and the government are trying to tackle?
Chris, we always knew that this was going to be a marathon and not a sprint. The point here is we inherited a debt and deficit disaster from the Labor Party. We are taking responsibility for cleaning up Labor's mess. The real question here is why is Bill Shorten continuing to put politics ahead of the national interest? The question that he has to answer, the question that Bill Shorten has to answer, does he still believe that we need to put the budget back into surplus? Is he still committed to a budget surplus? And if he is, and he doesn't like our plan to repair the budget, how would he do it? We haven't heard much from Bill Shorten about how he would fix the budget. To the contrary. I mean, the Labor Party under Bill Shorten is even more reckless and more irresponsible than they were under Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, because right now the Labor Party is opposed and is voting against savings measures initiated by Labor under Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, banked by Labor under Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd in their last budget. Yet under Bill Shorten, either he is too weak to impose his will when it comes to the national interest, or he's just happy to play lazy populist politics, putting the national interest at risk.
I want to come back to that in a moment, because that's a crucial issue. But just before I leave this budget cell, if you like, I want to ask you about going back a few weeks ago. You've just talked then about how important it is to hammer this message, to argue this case, to make sure you get these reforms through Parliament and you get the public support for that. Just a few weeks ago, you were in the United States on the US dialogue. Important business, of course, but not on the main economic game, the main budget game back here. The Treasurer, Joe Hockey, was out of the country on holidays for a week. The Assistant Treasurer, as we know, has been forced to resign, has not been replaced. I mean, have we seen enough effort, enough focus on pushing the message that should be, that you want to be, the #1 political message for the public at this time?
Well, Chris, we give it our absolute best every single day. And you're right. I mean, you know, we've been in government now for nearly a year. And I spent 1 week representing the government in the United States after the Parliament had risen for the winter break. So I was obviously there for the 2 very intensive first weeks of the new Senate. And I mean, look, I mean, I'm not a commentator on my own performance, obviously. What I can say to you is that as part of a team that is determined to repair the budget, which is determined to fix and clean up the mess that the Labor Party has left behind, all of us are giving it our absolute best every single day to, of course, achieve our objectives.
I don't doubt that, but the point I make with that sort of diary observation is that because of other commitments and other people doing this and that, there was effectively no one from the economic team making the case there for a week or so at a crucial time, and this Assistant Treasurer position has not been filled. It is such an important role, an important area. How long can the government afford to have that position vacant?
Well, it is not vacant. I'm acting as the Assistant Treasurer, and of course I've been acting in that position for a little while now, and I'll continue to act, you know, as long as the issues in relation to Senator Synodinos remain unresolved. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, you might think that 1 week is a make or break, but from our point of view, obviously, you know, this is an important debate, and that is a debate that will play out over some time. Incidentally, there were about 8 or 9 frontbenchers from the Labor Party, appropriately, representing the opposition at the American-Australian Leadership Dialogue. So, I mean, this is actually a very important bipartisan engagement between Australia and the United States. So I wouldn't minimise here the importance of what it is that we were doing over there.
Indeed, our own David Spears was over there for Sky News, and I'm probably a bit dark that I didn't get a flag. I do want to get back onto what you were saying about the Labor Party, and just to get back into that, I want to show viewers what your counterpart, Tony Burke, the Labor Shadow Finance Minister, had to say in part this morning on the ABC.
Well, the first problem with the budget is it's based on a false premise. It's based on there being a budget emergency, which there is not in Australia.
Well, Finance Minister Mathias Cormann, there's 2 points about that. One is this idea of a budget emergency. Did you oversell that upon coming to government? And secondly, Labor not seem to be actually conceding that there is any problem. I've used the term fiscal deniers. I mean, you cannot deny that the budget for some time now has been spending more than it's earning, and there must be a challenge for government to get it back into surplus.
Well, we've got to remember, like, the Labor Party inherited a budget with no government net debt, a $20 billion surplus and more than $50 billion in cash at the bank. In fact, in 2007, the government was collecting more than $1 billion in net interest payments on the back of a positive net asset position. Now, obviously, as I've said earlier, Labor delivered $191 billion in deficits in their first 5 budgets, $123 billion in projected deficits in their last budget, a trajectory taking us to $667 billion of government gross debt within the decade and rising beyond that. And right now, we are forced to pay $1 billion a month just on the interest in relation to the debt that the Labor Party has accumulated in government. Now, and of course the problem is that if we don't fix the unsustainable spending growth trajectory we're on, if we don't reduce government payment growth, we will continue to add to the debt. And what we're doing effectively is we're borrowing from our children and grandchildren in order to fund our lifestyle today. There wouldn't be a single parent that would think it's a good idea to put a proportion of your grocery bill onto your credit card every month, every month, 1 month after the other, never pay any of it off, take out a second credit card to pay the interest on the first, and then at the end of your life, hand over the lot to your children. I mean, because
now,
everybody would know that, and that is exactly what the Australian government is doing right now.
But this is the argument we know you need to make. It's been lost in the noise of late. What are you doing to try and get that debate back on track, and of course to actually make compromises in the Senate? Everybody knows that you can't get everything through the Senate, and even people like Senator Corey Bernardi today have been making that that statement of the obvious. Are you about to repackage your budget measures, make some sort of statement about how you're going to both message the budget and reform it in the Senate, compromise in the Senate?
Chris, I mean, this was always going to be a marathon and not a sprint, and we will continue to do what we have done for the last 3 months or so, and that is continue to explain why it is that we have to repair the budget, why that is important if we want to protect our living standards and if we want to build opportunity and prosperity for the future. And of course, you know, we are realists. We do know that in the Senate we don't have a majority. The government doesn't have a majority. That is not a new situation, incidentally. For most of the last 30 years, governments haven't had a majority in the
Sure, so
Senate.
you're going to need to compromise. Look at something like the school kids bonus, for instance. That was a scheme where parents had to apply for it and send in receipts effectively to get government back, money back from the government. Very little money was going out. Very few people were claiming it. So Labor just made it a post-out cheque to just about everybody. Might you reform that back so that it's a system, where a scheme that still exists but perhaps is more akin to what used to be there before Labor made it a broad payment to everybody?
Well, I mean, this is of course a payment that the Labor Party attached to their failed mining tax, and we were very clear in the lead up to the last election that we would scrap the mining tax, and we would scrap all of the unfunded promises that Labor has attached to it, because they are unfunded promises. I mean, right now the government is forced to borrow that money only to give it away and then to ask our children and grandchildren to repay that with interest. That is not in their interest. That's not fair, and that is not good economic and fiscal policy. And of course that is why we've said all the way through that we would get rid of the mining tax and the unfunded promises that Labor recklessly and irresponsibly attached to them. Now, you know, obviously, again, I mean, we do know that we have to have conversations, and we will continue to have conversations with crossbenchers. We need at least 6 senators to join with the government in order to get our legislation through. These conversations are ongoing, and obviously, once we have a resolution, you know, you'll find out about it.
Well, finally, the elephant in the room, to me, the big paradox that creates a lot of trouble for you, both in the Parliament and in the public debate, of course, is the paid parental leave scheme, because you're on about cutting taxes, and this involves an extra tax on business. You're on about curbing entitlements, and this involves a large new entitlement. Isn't it time to actually, sure, you can remain committed to the policy, but suggest now is not the time to deliver it, and at least delay that so that you're showing some sort of flexibility and some sort of willingness to compromise to try and get your other budget measures through?
Chris, I know that you've been a long-standing critic of our fair dinkum paid parental leave policy, but I will give you the same answers I've given you every single time you've asked me this question before.
At some stage, surely the government's got to concede that this is a paradox that hurts them. It just does. It runs counter to all your other arguments.
Well, it's not a paradox, and it doesn't hurt us as a paradox. This is a central part of our plan to build a stronger, more prosperous economy. It is an important and central part of dealing with one of our key economic challenges, which is falling workforce participation levels in the context of an ageing population. We do need to lift female workforce participation. A fair dinkum paid parental leave scheme, which is fairly available to all women in particular income brackets, not just public servants who are able to access a replacement wage now, but also to people working, to women working in small businesses across Australia. It is an important part of our plan to build a stronger, more prosperous economy, which in itself will help us repair our budget.
Mathias Cormann, thanks very much for joining us again tonight on Viewpoint.
Always good to be here.
The Finance Minister live from Perth there, and let me make it clear, I wanted to push him on that messaging business and what the government had done to coordinate it. I certainly wouldn't suggest that Mathias Cormann is not a hard worker, apart from flying back and forth across the Nullarbor from week to week doing his very important job as Finance Minister. He then gets up at sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to make himself available for Sky News, so certainly working hard at the job. I'll be back after the break with a great panel to kick around these issues.